Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank you all for joining us for tonight's event with Ravi Shankar in conversation with Sholeh Wolpé discussing Correctional, a Memoir. Tonight's event will end with a Q&A, and to submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button on the at the bottom of the screen. If you see a question on the list that you'd like for our speakers to answer, please click the like button. It'll bump it up in the queue. And we will try to answer as many questions as time will allow. And please also feel free to engage with each other and the conversation in the chat area. Because we're virtual, we love to see you present and here. So thank you for being with us. We'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, and you can learn more about them on our website. You can sign up for our email newsletter. You can follow us on social media at BookSoup, and you can also follow us right here on our Crowdcast page to get direct notifications. And past events are also available on our YouTube channel. Please support Book Soup and our authors tonight by purchasing a copy of tonight's featured book. You can do that by clicking the green button right below the viewer screen, and it'll redirect you to our website where you can complete the checkout process. Correctional is coming with signed book plates from Ravi, so that's always fun, and we love that. So thank you for giving us those. And it is a pre-order right now, but that's also really helpful for authors and bookstores. So don't be shy that it's a pre-order, because you'll still get your book, and you want to order early because it's holiday season, and bookstores, it's a crazy time. So with everything going on, you're better getting them ahead of time. So we're also open for in-store browsing. So if you're local and would love to come by, we'd love to see you in the store from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. And yeah, we'd love to see you. And thank you, Joseph, for ordering your copy. So with that said, let me introduce our guests for this evening. Dr. Ravi Shankar is an award-winning author and editor of more than 15 books and chapbooks of poetry. He is the founder of Drunken Boat, one of the world's oldest electronic journals of the arts, and has been featured in the New York Times, Paris Review, and on BBC, NPR, and PBS NewsHour. Chairman of the Asia Pacific Writers and Translators and New York Writers Workshop board member, he teaches at Tufts University and lives in Providence, Rhode Island with his partner and their dogs, Annie and Rishi. Sholeh Wolpé is an Iranian-American poet and playwright. She is the author or editor of more than a dozen books, several plays, and an oratorio. Her most recent book, Abacus of Loss, a Memoir in Verse, which is coming out March 2022 from University of Arkansas Press, is hailed by National Book Award finalist Ilya Kaminsky as a book that created its own genre, a thrill of lyric combined with the narrative spell. Sholeh has lived in Iran, Trinidad, and the United Kingdom, and is currently a writer in residence at the University of California. And she lives in Los Angeles and Barcelona. And I will share a link to her book as well, so you can pre-order that too. And without further ado, I'm going to pass the camera over to Ravi and Sholeh. Thank you both so much for being with us tonight. And everyone at home, thank you. And sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation.
Thank you. Oh my God, it's so nice to see you, Ravi. And thank you, everybody who's come here. I mean, this is still a difficult time, and I really look forward to a time when we can all actually physically be together. But in the meantime, thank you for being here and supporting our bookstores and authors. And it's my pleasure to speak with you, Ravi. I have actually known you personally for a long time. And
20 years is a little crazy to think about, but yes.
Oh my God, yes. We're getting old. No, we're not. Let's not talk about that.
No.
So I'm really, I was very, very excited to read this book because I knew when you had started writing it, and I was very much looking forward to it. And I was, of course, excited and honored when you asked me to be in conversation with you. First of all, let me say congratulations. It's a beautiful book. It's very touching, and it's very honest, very raw and honest, and I really like that. But to give our viewers just a little bit of an idea what it's about, I think on page 19, I think it's a really good start. Could you just read that a little bit for us?
Yes. So this is kind of the end of one of the first chapters, The Many Lines of Lineage. And it begins in India. I mean, this memoir kind of traverses time and space in a lot of ways. And this was after a lot of what happened in the memoir has happened to me. And I'm reflecting back on this experience. Seated cross-legged on a stone floor in the sandalwood and armpit-scented air, alone in a Hindu temple a continent away from Connecticut and my immediate family, decades away from being this little boy so desperate to fit in, I've somehow managed to make Appa's worst nightmare come true. On top of publicly humiliating myself, I've broken up my family, and any sustained sense of community has eluded me. I've been outcast. If genuine connection are born from small acts of trust, I've been disconnecting, and I need to find out why. I tried to cleanse the Connecticut headlines. Poetry professor resigns after string of arrests. Time to throw the book at Professor Shankar from my mind. Had I grown up in India in the light of this ancient and divergent culture, how different might my life have been? Poorer, certainly, but also perhaps less notorious, more certain of myself, or perhaps sneakier, more craven, sunk even further into a morass of materialism, or one breath closer to enlightenment, one day nearer betrayal. Would I have even become a writer? Would I have felt the caste system? To the teeming poverty, the ancient customs, to the insular and prejudiced nationalism of Hindu Vista instead of that of American patriotism? In the end, my parents' own struggle to gain a foothold in America had come at a considerable expense, and I had, wittingly and unwittingly, undone their many sacrifices to give their children a better life. I truly fucked up. I sit with the heavy shame of my circumstances, breathing it in and out. My coping strategy of hiding, exaggerating, developing as a cunning defensive mechanism over many years feels so flimsy out here. The only one I've really tricked is myself. I fear I will never be one of those people whose position in the world is certain. They will always know exactly where and to whom they belong, whereas I've never really known. Undo sunda ur idu. Sorry, I don't know where I'm from. Via Manhattan, via Manassas, via Madras. Through marriage and its dissolution, forever now the father of two extraordinary daughters, a son to my parents' pathologies, even as I gravitated to Amma, who treated me like a little Maharaja growing up. I was the divine firstborn, raised to believe affection doesn't have to be earned, but rather existed as one's manifest birthright. She looks the other way when there needs to be a moratorium on. She looks the other way when those she loves do things they should not have done. She does it out of love. Still, there needs to be a moratorium on blaming our parents. Amma is not wholly benign, nor Appa entirely inflexible, and I am obviously endowed with free will. Under the ancient vaults of immense wealth and Lord Vishnu's gaze, I sit with fear that the moment will end, that this will be the last time I see my Amma, my grandmother, alive, that I will never be redeemed, and that I will lose all that I love, that I will never fit in, that I will never be able to keep my daughters safe, and that I'm a failure. All the anxiety bubbles up inside me when suddenly, from somewhere inside the temple, someone strikes a bronze bowl. The vibrations lap against the cliff's edge of my thoughts until all that exists is pure sound. How odd, yet perfectly apt that the Tibetan sound is in this Hindu context. I draw in my breath, slowly, reverentially, making it the central fulcrum on which the calmly ongoing earth turns with all of us here on it. I'm here now, fully present, neither tumbling into regret nor rushing towards an unknown future, just sitting with myself. This time when I exhale, that heavy fear lifts and a new lightness overtakes my body. I greet descriptions of transcendence with a skepticism myself. So all I can tell you is what it really feels like in this moment. My separateness ends, leaving me floating above myself, looking down to see my life as a few simple stitches in this vast, unfinished yet woven into the fabric of a vast and growing tapestry, more marvelous and disturbing, unexpected and benevolent, weirder and more beautiful than I ever might have dared to imagine. I'm there, and you're there, and everyone we know is there, all the dead and the living and the unborn, all of us woven together in this endlessly unfurling living quilt of time and space. All of it is home.
Thank you. Thank you for reading that. It's I love how the book is imbued with poetry. You know, you, of course, being a poet, of course, you would be doing that. Could you tell us, I mean, that's a beautiful section, and I think gives everyone a sort of an idea what the book is about, but still we don't know. I mean, if you haven't read the book. So can you tell us a little bit about what happened, just a little bit, very summary, and why you had to write this memoir?
Yeah, correctional. It's and as you can tell, I mean, it is in part a story of my own parents' immigration from South India and growing up in Northern Virginia as a bicultural young American. I was born in Washington, D.C. But the crux of the story really is about my unexpected encounters with the criminal justice system. And I was wrongfully arrested in New York under the stop and frisk policy that was since found unconstitutional. And then I was not so innocent. I made some really stupid decisions. I was driving drunk and I had my license suspended. I was driving on a suspended license when I was under probation and ultimately had to do 90 days in Hartford Correctional, 90 days in jail, at the same time when I was going up for promotion to full professor at the university that I was at. And so this conjunction is really about what the correctional is about this moment and how I really, in the midst of a very successful life, might have taken a wrecking ball to my marriage, to my community, to my career, to, the place I lived. And I didn't really understand why. And so this book, I think, was part of that grappling. And the other part of the book is the silver lining in my experience, I think, was that I met men that I never would have met in my normal life. And they shared intimate stories of their lives and their difficulties and their triumphs. And they made me promise that I would do something. And this is true. They said, you have a voice. No one listens to us. No one cares about us. And we want you to do something with what we've told you. And so when I promised them that I would, I knew I had to write this book in some way, to wrangle with my own kind of inner demons, but also kind of tell the story of these men, which I think is metonymic of a larger kind of American narrative in some way.
Mm-hmm. So that's what I really loved about the book, because the book had two faces. One, it was about you, and it was also about the correctional system, the justice system in this country, and how, I mean, every day in the news we see very powerful corporations and men get away with a huge amount of, wrongdoing, but yet we have a lot of young men and women in the prison system, say for selling a joint, even though now it's legal. It's really, there is a lot of unfairness, and that how the justice system breeds more criminality, more criminals. It doesn't correct anything. It's not a correctional thing. It's actually breeds that. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in part of what this experience, which I never anticipated having, I never thought I would write this book. I mean, I'm a poet, an editor, a translator. I never thought I would spend time in jail. But what I found was very little hope or possibility of rehabilitation for many of these men. And it made me actually. I'm a lifelong advocate now for criminal justice reform, and it made me look into the roots of. It's very interesting because the criminal code, when the Puritans came over and founded the country, they believed in the sanguinary punishment. So very public kinds of things like brandings and maimings and pillory and dunking. We all probably remember the Scarlet Letter, right? Hester Prynne with that letter, and so it was shaming. It was kind of public shaming. And it was really the Quakers of the time, who were kind of the left-wing party of the time, the progressives, believed that, okay, well, the jails are a less barbaric, more humane way to kind of deal with criminals. But what they didn't anticipate with this whole puritanical idea of shaming would never leave. It would just get pushed into this subterranean space. And the Quakers believed in two principles: work, labor, and silence, both of which we still see in jails today. There's a lot of kind of prison labor where prisoners are paid far less than minimum wage, and then there's still solitary confinement, which the UN has found to be a kind of form of torture, but was still quite prevalent. And I was also curious about, as we all know, if we read the New Jim Crow or watched the 13th, that there's this racial disparity in who is incarcerated. And that made me very curious. And doing this research, I found it's maybe not a coincidence that the two big moments of explosion in America's prison growth were, one, after the Civil War and the post-Reconstructionist South, and then after the 1970s, after the Civil Rights Movement, where there was this sense in which prisons, I think, are used to kind of exacerbate some of the racial divisions. And under the rhetoric of public safety, people kind of swallow it. They say, oh, no, it's keeping us safe. Well, honestly, the rates of recidivism in America are far worse than many other developed nations. And secondly, it's costing all of us as taxpayers, whatever our political beliefs are, immensely. And it's clearly not working. It's not very effective. So I think that there's this more nefarious purpose, perhaps. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it seems to be like we're putting money into a system that is fundamentally broken, and we're disrupting generations worth of minority families. And what is the reason? Is it helping us collectively? I don't think so.
Yeah, that was, and then the characters that you talk about, that you meet in jail, they're very vivid, and they stay with you. So I really enjoyed. Well, I don't know, enjoyed it. I was shocked by what is happening in the system. Going back to your own story, you begin your book with a letter. Your book is divided into these sections where you write a letter to your daughters, to your wife, ex-wife, to your lover, to your parents, but you begin the book with a beautiful letter to your daughter, both your daughters. Could you speak to that a little?
Yeah, so this was kind of architectural structure that came upon the book very late. In fact, my partner Julie and I mean, part of the difficulty in writing a memoir, when you're a poet, you can transfigure and encode and use metaphors to talk about who you're discussing. But when you're writing a memoir, you're writing about people who might not want to be written about. And I think the early drafts of my memoir, I felt like I was much more of a fly on the wall. I was an observer. I was an immersion journalist, but I wasn't really coming to terms with what I had to do. And the notion of a correctional, I think, was I wanted to make amends to people in my life. And I thought addressing them directly through this vehicle of the epistle. And there's 6 letters, and each of them is named for one of the 6 seasons in South India. In India, there's the pre-vernal and the monsoon season, in addition to all the 4 seasons that we have here. And I guess I thought about this a little bit from Ta-Nehisi Coates' great memoir, my Between the World and Me, where he begins it as a letter to his young son. And I thought, after especially going through what I went through, and my daughter Samara, who's now 16, she's driving. We just were practicing driving. I can't believe it. But at that time, she was old enough to kind of know, and I realized that this was something that's going to come up. And so I wanted to frame that initial part of the book as a kind of letter to them. And I think that it creates a kind of a little bit of a hybrid space, because I include in the memoir some found materials, some letters, some more lyric sections, some more straightforward narration. But yes, I think my hope is that the letters kind of provide a little bit of kind of intimacy in some way. And one of the last letters is a letter to the universe, so it's also
and beautiful. I myself having a memoir that's going to come out next year, I really grappled, like I was scared to death as I was writing about my parents, and I know you wrote a great deal about especially your father. And can we have that photograph up, please? Let's see.
Yeah,
okay. So here you are.
wow.
Here you are with your sister. There's your father and your mother, Amma, right? Could you tell Appa and Mama? I think you are very you tell it straight when it comes about to your father. Let's put it that way. Okay. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about your father. And how has he read the memoir yet? Or do you think he will? And what do you think his reaction is going to be?
Yeah. My father, whose real name is Kauram Harihan Shankar, the naming convention in India is that usually you have a first initial, which is the village that you came from, and then your second initial is your given name, and then your last name is your family name. And he came as part of one of the first wave of Asian immigrants. Probably many of us know that there was this Asian Exclusion Act that existed for many years that restricted the quota of immigrants from quote unquote undesirable countries such as Africa and Asia. And in the 1960s, they released this for people who they thought could kind of add to the American economy. And my father was studying engineering, and he got accepted to Howard University. And so he moved in the mid 1960s to Washington, D.C. And then after a few years of living in America, he had an arranged marriage, a prearranged marriage to my mother, who was considerably younger. She was 19. He was almost 30. And they met once. And then the next time they met was on their wedding day. And then my father came back to go to school. And 6 months later, my mother, Amma, left everyone that she knew, her friends, her family, to move halfway across the world to live with this man who is now her husband. And my father is still an enigma to me in many ways, because I always knew him as this very strict, stern, Orthodox Brahmin, Hindu Brahmin. But when he came to America, he took the name of Sam Shankar, instead of KH, Kauram Harihan, Sam Shankar. And he had this other side. So he worked for a while as an amateur magician when I was growing up, and he used to work at bar mitzvahs and do these things. And he was the lieutenant governor of the Manassas Optimist Club. And yet at home, he was very stern, and he never talked about his past. And I just now, writing this memoir, realized he was in Washington, D.C. At the same time that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And when they would have sent in the National Guard, and half of D.C. was on fire, and there was riots. And I wonder how that would have affected him, to have this idea in his mind of America paved with streets of gold and this whole idea, and then to return to go to Washington, D.C. I used to think he went to Harvard, but no, it was Howard. as a South Asian, and to see what was happening with the civil rights movement. And, he lived with his uncle at that time, and he never talks about these days. My mother is the one who's kind of told me about some of that. And, I wish that I had a better relationship with my father. I think in some ways I've always been searching for a father figure. And it wasn't that he was a bad father in any way. I mean, he always kind of provided for us. And I think, I don't know if he will read the memoir. I think he's happy and proud that I have kind of written about it and I'm teaching again and all of that. But there is a way in South Asian culture that, emotion is not meant to be expressed. You repress a lot of the bad things and trauma that happens to you, and you don't really communicate. It's all about dharma and family duty and what you're kind of meant to do. And, so I having grown up here, it was hard for me, I think, to connect with my father growing up.
Yeah, but to tell me if I read this wrong in your memoir, and it could very possibly be that I misread it, but I felt there were portions that you were actually blaming your father. Like I felt a lot of anger coming through. Am I wrong? Am I wrong?
No, you're not. You're not wrong. I think that there was a way in which, my father's kind of default mode of dealing with things is to scold or to deny. Those are his kind of, and there was a way in which, and I respect and love my father in many ways, but I think that there was these secretive sides of himself that he kind of passed on to us. And there was also a very judgmental side. He really felt, even though he had moved to America, that America was inferior, that as a kind of Tamilian Brahmin, a vegetarian and a teetotaler, that he was in fact superior, and that he kind of wanted us to be part of American society, but not be tainted by it. And when I was growing up, I wanted to be a normal kid. I just wanted to hang out with my friends and, play sports and date and go out, go to prom, do all of these things that my peers were doing. And he restricted us from doing it, and without any really good reason, I think. And my father is still alive now, and I think he's happy that I've published some of the pictures of him. And my grandfather on my mother's side was a journalist in India, and I published some of those photos as well. But it's a complicated, and I still really don't. I mean, I know that he went to boarding school when he was very young, and I don't know what experiences that he had, because he never really talks about it. But
right. Yeah. First of all, I think your video went off. Is that just me, or?
Someone just said that it did. I don't know. Is it? Can you see me?
No.
Oh, okay. Wait. I'm toggling it back on. All right. Am I back?
No.
Oh, geez. Well, I don't know why. Oh, someone just said I can see you.
Okay, there you go. Now you're back.
Okay.
Now you're back. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I really want to get to this, okay? Because one of the a portion of your memoir that I was really specifically struck by is the way you. Okay, so the book is about all your misbehavings, right? So you've misbehaved, and you've not done, let's say, the right things, but you are blaming it on your Brahmin past, because you say you were given by your father a sense of superiority, that you felt you're above the law, you're above everything. Could you just talk, because I think it's very interesting that you observe that about yourself.
Yes, and I will say, I mean, my hope is that correctional ultimately moves beyond the lexicon of blaming and shaming, so that we can kind of connect. But you're right. I mean, I had this interesting conversation with Nick Flynn earlier, and he noticed exactly this thing that I both had this idea of exceptionalism and also marginalization simultaneously. And I think that was the case. It was that everything that my family was telling me, it was that, Brahmins are the best of the Indians and you're smarter than everyone else. And, your test scores show this. But my experience with all of the other kids was that I was othered. I was, made bullied and made fun of. And it was like, you're South Asian, you don't really belong. And so those twin principles, I think, were at the core of my young identity of feeling both somehow exceptional and somehow inferior simultaneously. And I think those feelings really deepened when I went and I spent this year in India, which I write about, right in the middle of my kind of assimilation. And then when I came back, when I was being kind of made fun of, I took solace in the fact that I had this experience that none of these other kids had. They hadn't even left the state, many of them, right? And I had been halfway across the world. And so you're telling me I'm different than you? Well, yeah, I am different than you. And I'm, in fact, maybe I'm better than you. Maybe I've seen more than you. Maybe I'm more. And that allowed me to kind of weather some of the assault that I felt happening. But what I didn't realize was that it was actually a very unhealthy thing because it was fragmenting my identity. I didn't have a holistic sense of who I was, and I was kind of putting on one face for my parents and another face for other people. And that all of that was still inside of me, even as an adult. And this is what the memoir is about grappling with, I think.
I think it's beautiful. I just love the way you have put all these parts of yourself, the different faces, the shaming, the otherness, all of that in a very, very raw and honest way on the paper. And I really appreciated that, Ravi. I want to invite anyone, by the way, who's here to put your question. I can see the box here. If you have a burning question, please put it in there and I'm happy to ask that of Ravi. But in the meantime, Ravi, we picked that other section that you can read for us, right?
Yes, and kind of in keeping with what we're talking about, this is one of the letters, and I'll just read maybe just the very beginning and end of this letter. Shall I? So this is Muthu Vanil, and there are these 6 letters are all named for the seasons in Tamil, which is my mother tongue. And a lot of people know, India is so polyglot. There are 22 official languages in the Indian Constitution, not including English and Hindi. And many people have not heard of Tamil, but I always like to say there are more native Tamil speakers in India than there are native English speakers in America, just to give you a sense of the scope of the language. So this is Muthu Vanil, summer. And this is a letter that I wrote to my parents, who in Tamil are called the Perakal. Dear Perakal, how strange that Tamil word for parents feels in my mouth. Though equally odd, I suppose, as the word pillai for son. Still, it's also because you are and always have been appa and amma to your children, gnarled branch and plum fruit. My 2 younger sisters and I drop from your boughs as seeds in this earth, and we owe you our lives. How much I love you for standing by me through the utter haumanam, the shame that your son, who could do no wrong, brought down upon our entire family name. Yet though some among us have committed far greater crimes, the only way forward is to forgive. You helped me walk when I was bow-legged, pushed me to excel in school. You provided me a stable and loving home, crippling me with every advantage a boy could hope for. Through tacit understanding, you taught us to project onto a world gone awry the rosiest aspects of ourselves. I know you only wanted to protect us, to provide better lives for us than you had, to shield us from disappointment and from the foreign corruptions of America that you didn't really understand. In return, you just asked that we do our duty as you had done for your own parents. But we came through, not from you. We were never your possessions. How secretive you are, Appa. You hold secrets so deep and so dark that you have to fill up whole locked basement rooms with them. Whatever it is that you're holding that is so concealed and frightful, I wish you relief. I only longed for a guru shishya relationship from you, while you wanted a master servant dynamic from your children. Much of that comes from generations of conditioning. Yet all my life, I've been looking for a mentor to give me the companionships and guidance that I lacked from you, though I've tried now to drill myself back through your souls so that I might begin to fathom the depth of the darkness and confusion in myself. Now I have nothing but compassion for you, for those depths inside you that will go unspoken, for the ways you may not be able to integrate fully in this lifetime, for the scars that you've left us, or left for us to pick over and heal. Amma, your love has been a crucial strand in the web that has kept me suspended from the void. I owe you so much of my openness, wit, curiosity, sparkle. It would be easy to make you everything Appa could not be. Though you're not blameless, and our blindness, whether real or willful, cannot grant us immunity from enabling others. How hard you've worked to make the world all that it is not. You renounced your life for us, and that duty to make you proud will always propel me forward. Your lessons in unconditional love are what has kept me strong in the face of this, all I've been through. I still remember the Tamil proverbs you taught me, such as Aruna Kanchi Palana Kanchi. Cold food is soon old food. And I'll skip right to the end here. However, my conscience demands the truth because anything less prolongs our suffering. Our family trauma is deeper and more mundane than mere emotional or physical agony. Rather, it's akin to the vague, unlocalized unsatisfactoriness that hovers on the edge of perception before erupting out into the open air as rage or despair. It's the accumulation of a lifetime's worth of birth and aging and death. It impairs us, suppressed in the carceral spaces of the soul, rather than being released out in the open. I cast away my burdens, and I'm left with gratitude. You've done well by me and my sisters, your grandchildren. That's precisely what gives me the courage to try to dismantle what went wrong in me and how it might have been shaped by what went unspoken in our family. There's no blame in that conversation, just as there's no judgment for me about the men and women I've met in jail and in a mental facility. I know you would rather that I had not written this book, but I'm done with repressing. There's a part of all of us in hiding, but I want to see and embrace my shadow, our shadows. For in the light of such clear seeing, may our connection to each other only deepen. Love, your Pillai.
Oh, that's a beautiful ending. You do address this question of your father naming you Ravi, and I really like how you come to terms with being someone who already exists, very, very famous person, and almost like not being in the shadow of this, pulling yourself out and claiming an identity. And would you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, that is a whole nother layer. Of course, many of you might know I share the name with India's most famous musician, the sitar player Ravi Shankar, who taught the Beatles how to play sitar at Woodstock and collaborated with Philip Glass. And in fact, there's also Sri Ravi Shankar from The Art of Living, this kind of spiritual guru. So I think I'm probably the third most well-known Ravi Shankar. But my parents were not even music fans. You can probably tell from the description of Appa that music, literature, film, these were all like tools of the demons in some way. So I was named Ravi because in Sanskrit, Ravi means sun. And I was born in January, which is, of course, the seasons are flipped. And so in South India, January is Pongal, the festival of harvest. And because I was born during January, I was named after the sun. And like I said, the naming convention in India is totally different. And so I just got that Shankar as a last name. And I have a chapter in the book where I talk about this, because growing up, I used to hear that a lot. And it was a strange phenomenon. I mean, sometimes people would make jokes, and other times they would be kind of disappointed. Oh, I was expecting Ravi Shankar, and instead I got you. And it's like, what? I'm Ravi Shankar? What are you talking about? So this idea that that you're not your name, right? The worst, I think, I don't know if I wrote about it in this, but I had this one reading in Scarborough. That was the worst. Oh, Sholeh has turned into an asteroid now. I don't know what's happening.
Okay.
But no, I was in Scarborough giving a poetry reading for the Scarborough Poetry Festival, and a number of people showed up, and they were all septuagenarians from a nearby retirement community. And I was so happy that so many people had come out. And I got on stage, and this older gentleman looked at me, and he pointed his cane at me, and he said, "That's not Ravi Shankar. He's an imposter." And then he looked around to everyone else, and he said, "That's not him. It's just a fraud. He's an imposter." And then all these people got up and just left. Because they were so old. They were in wheelchairs and walkers. It took them like 5 minutes to leave. And then I was just left with these like two people in the audience. And I read my poems anyway, but it was the kind of very strange experience.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you're a poet, and how difficult or how easy was it to switch to another genre all of a sudden? Because I don't think you've written prose before this, right?
Yeah, I've written critically, and I've written reviews and essays and things like that. But no,
right, well.
I would love to hear from you too. I found it to be, much more difficult than I anticipated being. I will say. I really had to go through many drafts, and had got a lot of feedback from my agent and from other readers. And a poem you can almost kind of hold in your mind at one time, but something as unwieldy as an entire memoir was really difficult. And there were moments where I just put it aside for like almost a year, and I felt like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I want to do this. I don't know if I'm doing it right. And I think certainly the early drafts did not strike the right tone. I think I was perhaps a little bitter and defensive, and it was very different. Especially the larger contrivances of plot, dialogue, setting, because you are telling a story and you want to move it forward. And I also wanted to be, and as you said, take accountability and kind of grapple with everything that had happened to me, but what it was saying about our society at this moment.
There were scenes that I imagine were very difficult to write, particularly when it broke my heart with that section where you're first taken in. You have to submit to the examination. They take your clothes off and they examine you, photograph you. It's horrifying, actually. It was very difficult for me, actually, those sections to read, because particularly since I know you, how difficult was it to write those sections?
Yeah, it was re-traumatizing in a lot of ways. I kept notebooks. That was the one way I felt I could survive this time, is that I would be an immersion journalist and write down everything that I saw and that I was experiencing. But those moments, and these 90 days I had to do, was stretched out over the course of a year and a half, which was reported in the media as, oh, he's got this private attorney and other people don't have this privilege. But honestly, I really wish I had just done it in one straight stretch, because every single time you have to kind of give away your freedom and be processed, and it's dehumanizing, it's humiliating, you're essentially reified into an object, and you're kind of jeered at, and you're given tans and a number, and the whole idea is to beat out any individuality out of you. And you're now part of the apparatus of the state, and you need to do what they say. And so having to do that 4 or 5 times, it didn't get any easier. It was something that I was dreading having to do. And I also just felt like there was this kind of casual sadism that existed throughout the entire process, that there was a sense that these men were criminals, and so the correctional officers, the COs as they're called, could treat them with impunity because they'd ended up there. And so it was their right to humiliate and berate them and make fun of their mental illnesses and do whatever they can to make their life a living hell. And does that help rehabilitation? And I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. So you wrote very eloquently about that. And what are you going to do about it now that you have written this? What other steps are you taking, or not?
Yeah. Well, no, I can't unsee what I've seen. I mean, this is something I believed in anyway. And I knew about on a kind of statistical, theoretical level. I mean, I've read them, but having viscerally experienced this and having spent time with these men, some of whom were really emotionally complicated, intelligent individuals who could really add a lot to our society. I mean, there's a level of ingenuity that I saw that, well, I wish some of my students had. I mean, some of these men were able to make kind of convection ovens out of cardboard boxes and nails they found, and they were writing poetry and doing all kinds of things. And so since I had this whole experience and I resigned my position at the university, I subsequently got a fellowship at the University of Sydney, where I got my PhD, and I looked at the roots of mass incarceration, and I also looked at prison memoirs by men of color. And since I've come back, I have been volunteering. I'm part of a great theatrical group called And Still We Rise, which is comprised of people who've been affected by the criminal justice system. They're based in Boston. I've actually become an actor and as well as a writer, which I never thought I would be. And I'm doing some work with Harvest Kitchen, which is and Garden Time, which brings horticultural skills and gardening skills into correctional facilities. And I mean, I feel really passionate about it because so many, and it's also this idea of reentry. I mean, if these men and women, and we already know that it's there's a racial disparity there, have served their time and pay their debt to society, and yet when they get out, they're not able to reintegrate. Their jobs are closed down to them. There are many things that they can't do. In some states, they lose the right to vote. They're disenfranchised. And I guess I would just have us all kind of think about, like, is this in the last 20 years, we spent 3 times more on incarcerating individuals than educating them. Is that really the way that we want to spend our money? Is that the most effective? And then when you look at the statistics, Scandinavian countries like Norway and Denmark have very low recidivism rates. It could be because they have more humane conditions, because they're invested in getting these people prepared to re-enter society. Here, it feels like so many of the men that I talked to, there was almost this fatalistic sense, like, well, I'm going to be back here. I'll be back here next year, and some of them were institutionalized. Some of them had mental health problems or drug addiction issues or had been homeless, but they didn't belong in prison, and they weren't getting what help they needed in prison either.
Right. Are you in touch with poets who are actually active, like Natalie Diaz, in the issues of prison?
Yes, a little bit. And I've corresponded a little bit with Jimmy Santiago Baca. And Tufts University, where I'm teaching now, actually has a program where they bring college-accredited classes into prisons. So I'm hoping to get more involved with that. It's an interesting conversation, because does the prison system need to be reformed, or does it kind of need to be abolished, and do we need to rebuild it from scratch? There's because there's so much that's kind of
Right.
wrong.
Yeah, but also I think undeniably it's also a question of race in this country. This is not a homogeneous country. We have diverse groups of people here, and I think to address that straight on, we have to address question of race and prejudice in society.
And that's what I don't understand, is just to speak frankly and openly about the history of our country. What is wrong with that? I mean, the police came out of slave patrols, and a lot of prisons there was this sense of plantation to prison pipeline, right? So that slaves instead could be imprisoned for a variety of spurious charges. And this is all part of our history. And I don't think it makes sense to say, oh, we're going to deny it and we're not going to read certain books and we're not going to talk about it because it makes us uncomfortable, but rather to say, okay, this is where we came from. What can we do to build a more equitable society? And you were in Australia with me, Sholeh, and many of those events begin with this kind of welcome to country and acknowledgement of the original stewards of the land and the indigenous people that were there. And I was always really deeply moved by that, even though my Australian friends would said, oh, it's just lip service, doesn't mean anything. But it's because I could never imagine us in America kind of doing that, acknowledging the slaves on whose backs the wealth of the nation was built, and the indigenous people that lived on this land that were colonized and exterminated. It's a difficult thing to do, but I think that first step of acknowledgement is what will go towards healing.
Absolutely. We don't even do the lip service. I mean, nothing is done here, and there is great denial. And there is one question here that someone's asking. It says, can you expand on how you moved past the fear of family, reading your experience, observations, and still telling your story honestly? Or did you have fears?
I did have a lot of fears, and part of it was, and I think as a writer, for any writers here, you have to block out those voices, because if you let those voices enter, you won't write anything. It will just stop you from creating from the beginning. And I knew, and it's so interesting, memory as well. I mean, some of the early drafts of this memoir had some episodes with my mother, and I shared them with her, and she said, that never happened. Why would you say that? I never did that. And it was like, well, yes, I did. And also like getting really real, I mean, is hard. I mean, every draft I was exposing myself and unpeeling more and more. But I think that the heart of really important writing comes from that space where you're afraid, where you're vulnerable, where you don't know what people are going to think because you're admitting something or revealing something that had been otherwise hidden. And it felt like the book needed to go there. And I always feel like, other people can write their own version of the events if they like, but this is my version of what happened.
Yeah. As you're familiar with, Attar, the Sufi mystic poet, 12th century Iranian Sufi mystic poet, talks about how you must go through pain and suffering in order to arrive at yourself, because only through pain and suffering are you able to let go of your ego, to let go of, to feel a certain detachment from the world. And when you have that detachment, you arrive at the next stage and closer to your beloved, which could be God, universe, whatever you believe in. I feel that as I was reading your book, I could sense this journey of pain that you were retaking by writing this, and feeling a sense of let me stop there and let you take over. How do you feel now?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this moment, which is the most traumatic of my life in retrospect, was this blessing because it exposed me to people that I never would have met. It made me come to terms with I could have perhaps skated along for 10 more years, another decade in an unhappy marriage and unhappy in my job, kind of pretending to be one thing. And
Yeah.
it made me really kind of take stock and take account. And I think it also has made me more empathetic. I mean, I feel now, I mean, it was amazing to me that these men that I was in this queue with accepted me as one of them, as part, and they shared their stories with me, and I realized that they were just as human as I was. And so this experience I think has kind of just opened my heart up. Whereas I think I probably was a little bit more snobby and elitist. And I think when you go through what I've gone through, it's humiliating, but it's also humbling. And the humbling part of that allows you to kind of get in touch with what is really important. And to also not really, I mean, I like that what you said. I mean, shame, I quote Carl Jung when he talks about shame as a hollowing out of the soul. And the thing is, once that happens, then you're free to be whatever. You're impervious to what other people think. You can kind of love and live your best life, and you're no longer captive to these other ideas. And so that was the positive thing that came out of all of this and helped me grow, I think.
Yeah, and I think reading your book would help others take the same journey, even though it's not their journey. But by taking your journey, I think it helps us all in one way or another. And we are at a time, but I just want to say very briefly, and I was very moved by the very, very last section of your book where you address women, and you address them with great humility. And I don't feel there was arrogance in that. And I just want to say, I don't want to give it away. I want everybody to get the book and read it, because it's truly a beautifully written, touching journey of a soul, really. And I really am grateful that you wrote it and shared it with us, Ravi.
Thank you so much, Sholeh. It's been so wonderful to be in conversation with you, especially because we talked about this book when I was still kind of working on it in Hong Kong and Australia and elsewhere. So
yeah,
it's and I can't wait for your memoir as well. So
thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you both, Ravi and Sholeh. That was such a wonderful conversation. Thank you both. Congrats again to both of you on your new books. And everyone, please pre-order Correctional with a signed book plate at the green button below. It's a really important time, as always, to support independent bookstores and authors always. So thank you all for being with us tonight. And thank you again, Ravi and Sholeh. And everyone have a wonderful rest of your night.
Right. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you for coming.